a small box, and a very large lie. There is a certain kind of silence that only exists after someone you love is gone. It is not empty, that is the strange part. People think grief is silent because there is nothing left, but that is not true. Grief is loud in a way no one else can hear. It hums under everything. It waits for you in the coffee cup she used to hold. It sits on her side of the bed like it pays rent there. And on the night this story really begins, I was sitting inside that silence, holding a small velvet box in my hands. Inside that box was a ring. Not just any ring, it was Sarah's ring, my wife's ring. The one thing in this entire world that still felt like her. The one thing I had promised myself I would keep until the day I stopped breathing. And when I opened that box that night, it was empty. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I did. I sat there staring into a little square of soft, worn velvet, and my brain simply refused to accept what my eyes were telling it. I picked the box up. I shook it, gently, like maybe the ring had slipped under the lining. I turned it over. I ran my thumb along the empty slot where the ring was supposed to sit, as if I could feel it back into existence. Nothing. The ring was gone. Now, if you have ever lost something that mattered, really mattered, the kind of thing that money can't replace, then you know the exact feeling that came next. It starts in your stomach, a cold drop. Then it climbs up into your chest and squeezes, and your mind starts racing through every possible innocent explanation, because you are desperate, absolutely desperate, for this to be a mistake and not a betrayal. Maybe I moved it. Maybe I put it somewhere safe and forgot. Maybe I was so tired one night that I hid it from myself. I tore that house apart. Drawers, boxes, the safe, the little dish by the door, her jewelry stand that I had never once had the courage to touch since the funeral. My hands were shaking the whole time, and that is when I found it. Not the ring, something worse. A receipt. A small, folded, crumpled receipt, sitting in the kitchen drawer where we throw the things we don't want to deal with. And on that receipt was the name of a jewelry buyer 3 towns over, a date from 2 weeks earlier, and a description that made my whole body go still. Vintage sapphire and diamond ring. Estate purchase. Estate purchase. They sold it. Someone sold my wife's ring. Someone walked into a store, put Sarah on a counter like she was scrap metal, and walked out with cash. And here is the part that I still can't fully explain, even now. I already knew who did it, before I called anyone, before I had a single piece of proof beyond that receipt. I knew, because in my family there was only ever one direction that betrayal ever came from, only one set of people who could look me in the eye, smile, hug me at my own wife's memorial, and then quietly rob the grave. My own parents. But I didn't scream. I didn't throw the box across the room. I didn't drive to their house and pound on the door. Number. I put the receipt in my pocket. I sat back down in the dark, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time, something colder and steadier than grief. I felt clarity. Because you see, my parents thought they knew everything about me. They thought they knew every dollar I had, every account I controlled, every favor I had done for them over the years. They thought they had already taken everything I would ever let them take. They were wrong. There was one account, one single account, buried in old paperwork that they had completely forgotten about, an account with my name on it, an account that quietly held the very thing they were about to depend on the most. And in that moment, sitting in the dark with an empty box in my lap, I made a decision. They took the last piece of my wife. So I was going to take back the one thing they never thought I could touch. Stay with me. Because to understand how one frozen account brought an entire family to its knees and why they never saw it coming, you first have to understand who Sarah was, what that ring meant, and just how long my family had been getting away with treating me like I owed them my whole life. It starts, like most betrayals do, with love. The ring, the woman, and the promise. Let me tell you about Sarah. I met her at the worst possible time in my life, which, looking back, was probably the only time I would have appreciated her the way she deserved. I was 26. I was working 2 jobs. I had just been made to feel, once again, like the disappointment of my family, but I'll get to that. Sarah worked at a little bookshop near my second job, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and warm dust. I used to go in during my breaks, pretend to look for something, and really just watch her recommend books to strangers with this quiet, glowing certainty, like she knew exactly which story each person needed. One day, she caught me pretending, put a book in my hands without a word, and said, "Trust me, you need this one." I still have that book. We got married 2 years later. Not a big wedding. We couldn't afford one, and honestly, neither of us wanted one. We stood in a small garden with maybe 20 people, and she wore her grandmother's ring. That ring. I have to tell you about that ring, because it is the beating heart of this entire story. It was old, genuinely old. It had belonged to Sarah's grandmother, and to her grandmother's mother before that. A deep blue sapphire in the center, ringed with tiny diamonds that had gone soft and warm with age. It wasn't flashy. It didn't sparkle in that loud, look-at-me way. It glowed, quietly, just like she did. Sarah used to say, the ring had survived a lot. It had survived a war. It had survived poverty. It had survived being pawned once, in a desperate winter, and bought back the following spring, by a woman who refused to let her family history go. "This ring always comes home," Sarah told me once, turning it in the light. "No matter who takes it, it always finds its way home." I didn't know then how much those words would end up meaning. When Sarah got sick, the ring became something more than a family heirloom. It became a kind of anchor. On the hard days, and there were so many hard days near the end, she would hold my hand, and I would feel that ring against my skin, and it was like holding on to the one solid thing in a world that was falling apart. Near the very end, when she was too weak to wear it herself, she took my hand one afternoon. The light was coming through the window in that soft gold way it does in late autumn. She pressed the ring into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "Keep this safe," she said. "Not because it's worth money. Keep it because it's proof. Proof that somebody loved you completely, even on the days you couldn't love yourself." I promised her. I promised her I would keep it safe until the day I died. 3 weeks later, she was gone. I am not going to spend a long time on that part, because if you have lost someone, you already know, and if you haven't, I could never explain it anyway. There is a before and an after, and the person you were in the before does not fully survive into the after. But I will tell you what I did in the after. I took that ring, and I put it in its little velvet box, and I kept it in the safest place I had. I looked at it sometimes. I talked to it, honestly, which probably sounds crazy, but grief makes you honest in ways nothing else does. That ring was the last warm thing in a cold house, and I want you to understand, I never told my family what it was worth. I want to be really clear about that, because it matters. I never once said a number. I never had it appraised in front of them. To me, it had no price. You cannot put a number on the last piece of someone's heartbeat. But somebody in my family did put a number on it. Somebody looked at the one thing keeping me tethered to the woman I loved, and they saw dollars. To understand who could do something like that, who could look at a grieving man and see a shopping opportunity, you have to understand the family I grew up in. You have to understand what it meant to be the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who always paid, always fixed, always forgave. You have to understand my sister Megan. And you have to understand my parents, who spent 30 years teaching me that my love for them was a debt, and their love for me was a reward I had to keep earning. Let me take you back, because the sale of that ring was not the beginning of the betrayal. It was just the day I finally stopped pretending I didn't see it, the reliable son and the golden child. In every family that plays favorites, there are 2 children who get assigned a role before they are old enough to argue. One child becomes the treasure, the prize, the one whose every success is a family celebration and whose every failure is somehow the world's fault. And the other child becomes the foundation, the support beam, the one who is praised for being so responsible and so mature, which, if you grew up as that child, you know is just a polite way of saying, you are the one we will never worry about, because you will always take care of yourself, and probably everyone else too. I was the foundation. My sister, Megan, was the treasure. I don't say that with as much bitterness as it might sound. For a long time, I didn't even see it. When you grow up inside a system, you don't notice the walls. You just think that's what a room is. Megan is 3 years younger than me. From the moment she could talk, she had a gift for being adored. She was charming, she was funny, and when she cried, the entire house rearranged itself to make her stop. Me? When I cried, I was told to toughen up. When Megan cried, the world stopped turning. I learned early that in my family, love was not given, it was earned, and the way you earned it was by being useful. So I became useful. When my parents had money trouble, which was often, because they spent like the future was somebody else's problem, I was the one who quietly covered it. In my 20s, in my 30s, first it was small things, a phone bill here, a car repair there. Then it grew. It always grows, when you let it. By the time I was in my mid-30s, I was doing well for myself. Not rich, but comfortable. I had built a small business from nothing, worked myself half to death, and finally had something solid. And the second I had it, my family's problems became my problems, in a way that was never spoken out loud, but was always, always expected. I paid the shortfall on my parents' mortgage more than once. I covered emergencies. I set up accounts to make things easier. I'll come back to that, because those accounts matter more than you can imagine right now. And Megan? Megan received. Megan got the help with rent. Megan got the loans that were never, ever paid back. Megan got the new car when hers broke down, because heaven forbid the treasure walk anywhere. And every single time, the money flowed through my parents from me, and every single time, the gratitude went to my parents from Megan. I was the invisible engine. I ran the whole thing, and nobody ever said thank you to the engine. Now, here is the part I need you to really understand, because it explains everything that came later. I did not resent Sarah's place in my life, partly because she was the first person who ever saw the engine. She used to say, "You know you're allowed to say no to them, right?" And I would laugh and say I knew. But I didn't. Really, I didn't know how. Saying no to my family felt like unplugging myself. Like I would simply cease to exist if I stopped being useful. When Sarah got sick, my family's reaction told me everything I had been refusing to see for 30 years. My mother's first question, her first question, when I told her Sarah's diagnosis, was whether this was going to affect my ability to help with a payment they had coming up. I have never forgotten that. I never will. And when Sarah died, they came to the memorial. They wore black. They hugged me. My mother cried, and I think some part of her cries were even real. But within a month, the calls started again. The "we hate to ask, but" calls. The "we know it's a hard time, but you understand" calls. I was drowning in grief, and my family was standing on the shore, asking if I could throw them my wallet before I went under. And I did. Of course I did, because that is who they had built me to be. But something had cracked, quietly, somewhere deep. Sarah's voice was in my head now. You're allowed to say no. I just hadn't said it yet. I was still the reliable son, still the foundation, still the engine running in the dark. And that, right there, is exactly why they thought they could do what they did next. They thought the foundation would hold, no matter what they piled on top of it. They thought the engine would keep running, no matter how badly they treated it. They thought I would forgive anything. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Because there is a difference between a man who won't fight back and a man who simply hasn't had a reason to, yet. A trip, a treasure, and a target. It started, of all things, with a vacation. Megan wanted to go on a trip, not a normal trip, a 3-week luxury trip across Europe, the kind you see on social media, all infinity pools and rooftop dinners and captions about living your best life. She had been posting about it for weeks. Countdown graphics, screenshots of hotels, little videos of her packing outfits she hadn't bought yet. The only small problem was that Megan could not afford it. Not even close. Megan could not afford the airport parking, let alone 3 weeks of 5-star hotels. Now, in a normal family, this would be the end of the story. You want a trip you can't afford, you don't go, or you save up, or you go somewhere cheaper, simple. But this was not a normal family. This was my family. And in my family, when the treasure wants something, the whole system starts looking for a way to make it happen. I found out about the plan the way I found out about most things, accidentally and after the fact. My mother called me one evening, chatty, warm, suspiciously warm actually, which should have been my first warning. She talked for a while about nothing, and then she slid it in, casual as anything. You know, it would be so nice if Megan could have this trip. She's had such a hard year. A hard year, Megan, who had lost nothing, who had buried no one, who had spent the year I buried my wife posting photos from brunch. I said something non-committal. I was too tired to argue. And then my mother said the thing that, looking back, was the moment the trap was really set. She said, "We'll find a way. We always do. We'll find a way." I didn't think anything of it at the time. I assumed finding a way meant they'd come back to me eventually with the "we hate to ask, but call," and I'd have to decide whether to fund my sister's champagne holiday while I was still sleeping on the couch because I couldn't bear our bed. But that is not what finding a way meant. Because here is what I learned later, piece by piece, and it makes my blood run cold even now. My parents had already decided they were not going to ask me for the money. They had decided that this time they were going to get it another way, a quieter way, a way that wouldn't require them to hear me hesitate, because some cruel, calculating part of them knew that even I might finally say no to funding a luxury vacation while I was grieving. So they went looking around my life for something they could turn into cash without asking. And they remembered the ring. Now, they did not know what that ring meant. Let me be fair, even to them, for one moment. They did not fully understand that it was Sarah's last gift to me, her final act of love pressed into my hand. I never told them the whole story. To them, it was just the old ring. An expensive-looking antique sitting in a grieving man's drawer, doing nothing, earning nothing. But, and this is the part I cannot forgive, they knew it was hers. They knew it was the most precious thing I owned. My mother had complimented it once at our wedding. She knew exactly what it was, and exactly who it belonged to. And she looked at that, and she looked at Megan's trip, and she did the math. The plan was simple, and it was ugly. They had a spare key to my house. I'd given it to them years ago, for emergencies, back when I still believed family meant safety. They would let themselves in while I was at work. They would take the ring, they would sell it, they would use the money for Megan's trip, and they would say nothing. And the worst part? The part that tells you everything about how they saw me? They genuinely believed I would never notice. Think about that. They looked at a man so buried in grief that he could barely function, and instead of seeing someone to protect, they saw someone too broken to keep track of his own life. They saw a mark, an easy target, a grieving man who wouldn't even realize the last piece of his wife was gone. They were half right. I was that broken. But grief does a strange thing. It takes away everything except the things that matter most, and that ring mattered most. So a few weeks after that phone call, on an ordinary Tuesday, I came home from work. Nothing looked wrong. Nothing looked touched. My parents were very careful. They put everything back exactly where it belonged. Everything except the ring. And the receipt they didn't even realize had fallen out of my mother's coat pocket into that kitchen drawer, where it sat like a tiny loaded gun, waiting for me to find it. I didn't check the box that night, or the next. Grief had made me afraid to open it too often, because every time I did, I felt the loss all over again. But a week later, on the night I told you about at the beginning, something made me reach for it. Call it instinct. Call it Sarah. I don't know. I opened the box, and the empty velvet stared back at me like an open wound. Now you know how the ring was taken. But knowing how is not the same as knowing for sure. And I am not a man who moves on anger alone. I needed proof, real proof. The kind that could not be explained away by a lie and a mother's tears. So before I did anything, before the account, before the freeze, before any of it, I went hunting for the truth. And what I found was so much worse than a stolen ring. The shop, the receipt, and the phone that never lies. I did not sleep that night. I sat with the receipt in my hand until the sky went from black to gray to that thin, sick, early morning white, and by the time the sun was fully up, I had made a decision. I was not going to storm into my parents' house and scream. I was not going to give them the fight they could twist and reshape until somehow I was the villain, because they were experts at that, 30 years of practice. No. First, I was going to know everything, every single thing. Facts. Cold, hard, undeniable facts. The kind that don't bend when someone cries. So I started with the store. The receipt had a name, a jewelry and estate buyer, 3 towns over. I drove there the moment it opened. I walked in, and I did something that surprised even me. I stayed calm. Polite, friendly even. I told the man behind the counter a version of the truth, that a ring belonging to my late wife had been sold, and I was trying to trace it, and I would be endlessly grateful for any help. Now, most of the time, these places don't tell you anything, but grief has a strange power. When a man walks into your shop and quietly, steadily explains that someone sold his dead wife's ring, most people, most decent people, want to help. And the man behind that counter was decent. He remembered the ring. Of course he did. He pulled up the record, and there it was, in black and white, the date, the description, vintage sapphire and diamond ring, and the amount they had paid for it. I won't tell you the number. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it was a fraction, a tiny, insulting fraction, of what that ring was actually worth. They had practically given Sarah away. But more than the number, I needed the name. Who sold it? I asked, gently, if he could tell me who had brought it in. He hesitated. Rules, he said, privacy. And then I said the only true thing I had left. I said, "Sir, I'm not here to cause trouble. I already know who did it. I just need to hear someone say it out loud, so I can finally stop hoping I'm wrong." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he turned the screen around. The name on the sale was my mother's. My mother had walked into that shop, my dead wife's ring in her purse, and sold it under her own name, without a flicker of shame. I thanked the man. I meant it. And then something else happened, something that turned this from a sad story into the story you're actually here for. He said, "Wait." He went into the back, and he came out holding a small tray. Because the ring hadn't sold yet. It was still there, sitting in his display case, waiting for a buyer, glowing that quiet blue glow that I would know anywhere in the world. Sarah's ring was still in that shop. I nearly fell apart right there on the floor. I asked how much to buy it back, and here is where the decent man became a great one. He named a fair price, not what it was worth, but what he had paid, plus a small honest margin. He could have gouged me. Grief makes people easy to rob, as my own family had just proven, but he didn't. I bought it back on the spot, every dollar I had on me and then some. I didn't care. I would have sold my car in the parking lot. I held that little box again, and this time, when I opened it, the ring was there. Warm, home. "This ring always comes home," Sarah's voice whispered. "No matter who takes it, it always finds its way home." She was right. She was always right. Now, I want you to notice something. At this exact moment, I could have stopped. I had the ring back. The precious thing was safe. Many people would have said, "Let it go, be grateful, move on." But I want to be honest with you, because this channel is about the truth of what betrayal does to a person. I could not let it go, and not because of greed, because of what I found next. You see, before I left, I decided to do one more thing. I texted my mother, calm, normal. I asked if she and Dad wanted to come over for dinner that weekend, just to see how they'd act, just to test the water. And here is what happened. My mother didn't reply to me right away, but she did something that would change everything. She replied to the wrong chat. There was a family group chat, me, my parents, and Megan, and there was another chat, just the 3 of them, without me. And my mother, in a hurry, tapped the wrong one. She sent a message meant for the secret chat, into the chat that had me in it. For about 90 seconds, before she realized and deleted it, that message sat there for me to read. I screenshotted it. Of course I did. The message said, "And I will clean up the meanness, but not the meaning." The message said, "He invited us to dinner, lol. He still has no idea about the ring. Told you he'd never notice. He's too much of a mess to keep track of anything right now. Megan, book the flights, the money cleared." He still has no idea. He's too much of a mess. The money cleared. They weren't sorry. They weren't even nervous. They were laughing. They were laughing at my grief. They had looked at the deepest wound of my entire life, the death of my wife, and they had used it as a tool, as camouflage. My pain was their cover story. The more broken I looked, the safer they felt. I sat in that parking lot, the recovered ring in one hand, my phone in the other, and I felt the last thread of the old me, the reliable sun, the foundation, the engine that runs in the dark. I felt it snap. But I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I got very, very quiet. Because in that message, my mother had said something she did not realize was the most dangerous sentence she had ever typed. The money cleared. The money for Megan's trip had cleared, which meant it was sitting somewhere, in an account, waiting to be spent. And I knew exactly which account. I knew, because I was the one who opened it. The one thing my name was still on. I need to take you back a few years now, to understand the trap that my parents had walked into without ever knowing it existed. Remember how I told you I was the useful one, the one who set up accounts and fixed problems and quietly kept the whole family machine running? Well, years ago, long before any of this, my parents had one of their money crises. A bad one. They were behind on things, disorganized, drowning in a mess of half-paid bills, and they came to me, and I did what I always did. I fixed it. But this time, I fixed it in a very particular way. Instead of just handing them cash that would vanish into their spending, I sat down and set up a proper account for the family, a shared account, meant to be a cushion, a place to hold money for emergencies, for the mortgage shortfalls, for the rainy days that always seemed to come for them. I funded most of it myself, over the years. It became the account that everything flowed through. Their mortgage help came from it. Emergencies came from it. It was the family's safety net. And here is the crucial part, the part that decided everything. Because I was the one who set it up, and because I was the one funding it, and because, frankly, my parents could not be trusted to manage anything without losing the paperwork, I was the primary holder of that account. Legally, officially, on every document. My name, my social security number, my control. My parents were on it too, as authorized users. They could deposit, they could withdraw, they could treat it like their own money, and for years they did. But it was never their account. It was mine. They just forgot. That is the honest truth of it. They forgot. Over the years, as the money flowed and the account just quietly worked, they stopped thinking of it as something I set up. In their minds, it became our account, then just the account, then simply our money. The origin of it faded. The paperwork sat in a drawer somewhere, unread, out of sight, out of mind. They forgot that the safety net had one name stitched into every corner of it, mine. And when they sold Sarah's ring, do you want to guess where they put the money? That's right. They deposited the cash from the ring, my wife's ring, straight into that account, mixed it in with everything else, and that was the money that cleared. That was the money Megan was about to spend on infinity pools and rooftop dinners. The proceeds from selling the last piece of my dead wife were sitting inside an account that legally, completely, 100% belonged to me. Let that sink in for a moment, because they never did. They had robbed me and then hidden the loot inside my own safe. Now I want to be very clear about something, because this matters, and this is why this story is one about justice and not just anger. I did not do anything illegal. I did not steal. I did not commit fraud. I did not touch a single thing that wasn't already, legally, mine. Everything I was about to do, I had every right to do. That is the sharpest kind of justice there is. The kind where you don't have to break a single rule because your enemy handed you the win by breaking rules they thought didn't apply to them. I drove home that night in complete silence. No radio. Just the road and my own steady breathing. And by the time I pulled into my driveway, The plan was fully formed in my head. It was clean, it was legal, and it was going to bring the entire family machine grinding to a halt. The machine that had run on my labor for 30 years, while everyone else took the credit. Step 1. I would call the bank first thing in the morning. As the primary account holder, I would freeze the account, not empty it, not vanish with the money like a thief. Freeze it, lock it, pending review, which meant no withdrawals, no transfers, no payments, nothing in, nothing out. Which meant Megan's trip, every hotel, every flight, every deposit that hadn't fully processed, would be dead in the water. Step 2. I would remove my parents as authorized users. Their access, gone. The safety net that had caught them 100 times, the one they'd come to see as a bottomless well, closed, sealed, mine again, entirely. Step 3. And this was the quietest, most important step of all. I would say nothing. Nothing. I would not warn them. I would not threaten them. I would not give them a single word to argue with or twist or cry over. I would simply let the world they had built on my back stop turning, and I would let them discover, all on their own, exactly how much of their comfortable life had been standing on a foundation with my name on it. They wanted to know if I'd noticed the ring was gone. Oh, I noticed. And now they were about to notice something too. They were about to notice what happens when the engine finally shuts off. I went to bed that night for the first time in months and slept without dreaming. Deep, still, peaceful. The next morning, I woke up, made a cup of coffee in Sarah's favorite mug, and picked up the phone. One phone call, and the ground disappeared. The bank opened at 9. I called at 9:01. I want to describe this part carefully, because I know some of you are expecting a dramatic explosion, a screaming match, some big cinematic confrontation with slamming doors. But real justice is almost never loud. Real justice is quiet and precise and terrifyingly calm. Real justice is a man with a cup of coffee, speaking politely to a customer service representative, changing the entire course of his family's life with nothing but the truth and his own legal name. The representative was kind, professional. She verified my identity. Every detail matched, because of course it did. It was my account. And then I explained, very calmly, that I was the primary account holder, that I had concerns about unauthorized activity on the account, and that I needed to place an immediate freeze pending a full review. Those words, unauthorized activity, were not a lie. Someone had deposited the proceeds of a stolen item, my late wife's ring, into my account. Something had happened on that account that I, the owner, did not authorize. Every word was true. The representative asked a few questions. I answered them honestly, and then she said the words that ended one chapter of my life and began another. All right, sir. The account is now frozen. No transactions will be able to process until the review is complete. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Just like that. 30 years of being the invisible engine. 30 years of paying and fixing and forgiving. 30 years of being treated like a resource instead of a son. And it all came down to one sentence, spoken calmly over a cup of coffee. The account is now frozen. But I wasn't done. Remember step 2. I asked the representative to remove the authorized users from the account, my parents. Their access, gone. She explained that as the primary holder, I had every right to do so, and she processed it right there. In under a minute, my parents went from having unlimited access to a well they'd drunk from for years, to having no access at all, locked out, standing outside a door that used to be open, holding a key that no longer worked, and then the money. The money from Sarah's ring, mixed in with everything else. I did not touch it in that moment. I wanted it frozen, not spent, not moved. I wanted it to sit there, locked, untouchable, while my family scrambled and panicked, and slowly, horribly, figured out what had happened. That money would be dealt with properly, legally, in time. It would come back to me, the primary holder, the way it should. But for now, it would simply sit there, frozen, a monument to their own greed. I hung up the phone. And then I did the hardest thing of all. Nothing. I went to work. I answered emails. I ate lunch. I lived my ordinary life, and the whole time, on the other side of town, a countdown was ticking that my family didn't even know had started. Because here is what they didn't know. Megan's trip was leaving in 4 days. And a luxury European trip is not one payment, it is dozens. The final hotel balances, the tour deposits, the pre-authorizations, the hold, charges that hotels place on your account when you check in. All of it was set up to pull from the family account, the account they thought was theirs, the account that was now a sealed vault. For the first day, nothing happened. They didn't notice. Why would they? The money had cleared. In their minds, the plan had worked. Megan was posting packing videos. My mother was probably telling her friends about her wonderful daughter's wonderful trip. They had no idea the floor had already been pulled out from under them. They were still standing exactly where they had been standing. They just hadn't looked down yet. On the second day, the first charge tried to process. A final hotel payment. A big one. It hit the account. And it bounced. Declined. I imagine, because I wasn't there, I only heard about the aftermath later. I imagine that first decline caused a little flicker of confusion. That's strange. Try it again. Must be a bank glitch. So they tried again. Declined. And again. Declined. That flicker of confusion, I imagine, started to grow into something colder, because now Megan was checking the account herself. And Megan couldn't log in, her access was gone, and my parents couldn't log in, their access was gone. And somewhere in the back of my mother's mind, I imagine, a very small, very quiet voice was beginning to ask a very dangerous question. Whose account was this again? Who set it up? Who was the name on all that paperwork we never bothered to read? The panic, when it came fast. My phone started ringing that evening. I looked at the screen. Mom. I let it ring. I looked at the ring, Sarah's ring, back home, glowing on the table beside me. And I let the phone ring and ring and ring until it stopped. They were about to learn the lesson 30 years had failed to teach them. You do not build your whole life on someone's back and then spit on them and expect the back to keep holding you up. Sometimes the foundation decides it has held enough. 12 missed calls and a knock at the door. By the morning of the third day, I had 12 missed calls. 4 from my mother, 3 from my father, 5 from Megan, and a text from Megan that I want to read to you, almost word for word, because it tells you everything about who these people really are. It said, "What did you do? My trip is falling apart. The hotels are canceling. This is going to ruin everything. Fix it now. This is so selfish of you. I can't believe you'd do this to me right now. Selfish. I was selfish. Read that again. My sister, who had spent money from my dead wife's stolen ring, was calling me selfish for freezing my own account. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She was outraged that the money train had stopped. In her entire message, there was not one word about the ring. Not one word about Sarah. Not one word of apology. Just fury that her free vacation was collapsing. That message told me I had made exactly the right decision. I did not reply. Instead, I did something. I sat down, and I wrote everything out. Calmly. Clearly. The receipt. The store. The sale under my mother's name. The recovered ring. The screenshot of the group chat message. He still has no idea. He's too much of a mess. The money cleared. All of it. Documented. Dated. Organized. I wasn't building a case for the police, though I could have. I was building a case for the truth, because I knew what was coming. I knew my family, and I knew that within hours they were going to come to me, and they were going to try to do what they always did, turn themselves into the victims, and turn me into the villain. I was ready this time. That evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it, and there they were, all 3 of them, my mother, my father, and Megan, standing on my porch in the fading light. And I have to tell you, the looks on their faces were something I will remember for the rest of my life. They weren't angry, not yet. They were scared. Because for the first time in 30 years, the machine wasn't working. The button they had always pressed to make problems disappear, me, had stopped responding. And they didn't understand why, and it terrified them. My mother started first. She led with tears. She always led with tears. "Sweetheart," she said, "there's been some kind of terrible mix-up with the bank, and Megan's trip is—" "You sold Sarah's ring," I said. Just like that, flat, calm, and I watched all three of them freeze. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever heard. My mother's mouth opened and closed. My father looked at the ground. And Megan actually had the nerve to say, "It was just an old ring. Why are you being so dramatic?" I held up my hand, and something in my face made her stop. "Come in," I said. "Sit down." They came in. They sat down. And for the first time in my entire life, they were the ones waiting to hear what I had decided, instead of the other way around. I placed my phone on the table, screen up, showing the group chat message. The one my mother sent by accident. "He still has no idea. He's too much of a mess." My mother went white. That's not, I didn't mean." "You did," I said quietly. "You meant every word. You looked at me, drowning, and you decided my grief made me an easy target. You took the last thing my wife ever gave me. She pressed it into my hand 3 weeks before she died, and told me it was proof that someone loved me completely, and you sold it, for a vacation, and then you laughed about it." The room was silent. "You want to know what you got wrong?" I went on. "You didn't get the ring wrong. I bought it back. It's home now, no thanks to you. What you got wrong was the account." My father finally spoke. "The account," he said slowly, like the word was a stone in his mouth. "Yes," I said. "The account, the one that pays your mortgage shortfall, the one that catches you every time you fall, the one you deposited the ring money into. You forgot something about that account." I looked at each of them, one at a time. "It's mine. It always has been. My name, my money, my rules. You were never account holders. You were guests, and I've decided to stop having guests." I watched it land. I watched 30 years of assumptions crumble in real time. They had built their entire comfort, their entire sense of security, on a foundation they never once bothered to check. And now they were watching that foundation stand up, look them in the eye, and walk away. "You can't just cut us off," my mother whispered. "We're your family. We depend on—" "I know," I said. "You depend on me. You always have. But depending on someone and respecting them are two different things, and you never once respected me. You just used me. There's a difference, and I finally learned it. Sarah taught me, even after she was gone." Megan started to cry now. Real tears, finally, but not for the right reasons. She was crying for the trip, for the money, for herself, always for herself. And I felt nothing, not cruelty, not triumph, just a clean, quiet nothing. The nothing you feel when a wound that's been infected for 30 years, finally, starts to close. But I wasn't finished, because taking back what was mine wasn't the whole point. The whole point was making sure they never, ever forgot what they had done. And more than that, making sure that this time, the truth stayed the truth, and couldn't be twisted into a lie. There was one more move to make, and it was the one that changed everything, when the whole family finally saw the truth. Here is something I had learned, over 30 years of being the foundation of a family that took me for granted. In families like mine, the abuse survives because of secrecy. Everything happens in private. The favoritism, the guilt, the money that flows one direction while the gratitude flows the other. It all works because no one ever says it out loud, all at once, in front of everyone. The moment you drag it into the light, the whole thing, all at once, it cannot survive. Lies need dark corners. The truth just needs a room with the lights on. So I turned the lights on. My parents had a large extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins. The kind of big family that gathered for holidays, that gossiped, that had opinions about everyone and everything. And for 30 years, in that family, I had a reputation carefully managed by my parents. I was the difficult one, the distant one, the one who didn't do enough for his poor, struggling parents. That was the story they told, quietly, at the gatherings I was too busy working to attend, because I was always working. to pay for the very things they then complained I didn't help with. They had controlled the narrative my entire life. Not anymore. That week, there was a large family gathering already scheduled. A birthday, a big one, the whole extended family together. My parents assumed I wouldn't come. I usually didn't. Too busy, too distant. I came. And I brought a folder. I want to be clear, I did not stand up and scream. I did not make a scene. Making a scene is what they expected, and it's what they could have used to paint me as the unstable one. No, I was calm, devastatingly, unshakably calm. At one point in the evening, an aunt, one of the ones who had always believed my parents' version of me, made a comment, a little dig, something about how nice it was that Megan finally got to travel, and wasn't it a shame that some people in the family were too tight to help their own parents more. The room chuckled. My parents smiled. And I set down my drink, and I said, quietly, "Actually, can I share something with everyone? Since we're a family, and families should know the truth about each other." The room went quiet, in that way rooms do, when everyone senses something is about to happen. I did not attack, I did not accuse, I simply told the truth, plainly, chronologically, without drama, which made it all the more devastating. I told them about the years of payments, the mortgage help, the emergencies, the loans to Megan that were never repaid. I didn't exaggerate a single number, I didn't have to. And then, gently, I told them about the ring, about Sarah, about what that ring meant, about the day my wife pressed it into my hand, and then I told them how it was taken and sold, under my mother's name, to fund the very trip the aunt had just praised. You could have heard a pin drop. I placed the folder on the table, the receipt, the record of the sale, and I hesitated here, because this was the killing blow. The screenshot. He still has no idea. He's too much of a mess. The money cleared. I didn't read it out loud. I didn't have to. I just let the people nearest the table see it, and I watched the truth ripple outward across that room, like a stone dropped in still water. My mother tried, one last time, to spin it. "It wasn't like that," she started. "He's leaving out." But it was too late. The narrative she had spent 30 years building, the story of the difficult son and the struggling, loving parents, it collapsed in a single evening, because the truth, once it's in the light, is very hard to argue with, and I had every receipt, literally. My uncle, my mother's own brother, looked at her with an expression I had never seen aimed at her before. Disgust. Quiet, disappointed disgust. He looked at me and said, "Son, I am so sorry. We had no idea. We were told a very different story." "I know you were," I said. "That's why I'm telling you the real one." The evening ended not with a bang, but with my parents and Megan leaving early, in silence, under the weight of 100 eyes that finally saw them clearly. That was the real revenge. Not the frozen account, not the money. The account was just the tool. The revenge was the truth. The revenge was 30 years of lies finally meeting the daylight. The revenge was that they could never again pretend to be the victims, because now everyone knew who the real one had been all along. They had spent my whole life controlling the story. And in one quiet evening, with one folder and one calm voice, I took the story back. But even then, even with all of that, this story was not quite over, because revenge, real revenge, is never really about the other person. In the end, it's about what you do with yourself once the dust settles. And what I did next surprised even me, what I kept, what I let go, and what I chose. In the weeks that followed, my life changed in ways I did not expect. Let me tell you what happened to each of them, because I know you want to know. My parents lost more than an account. They lost their safety net, yes. I closed the family account entirely and moved what was legally mine into an account with only my name on it, and I never funded a joint account for them again. But they lost something bigger than money. They lost the mask. The whole extended family now knew the truth. The gatherings changed. The whispers that used to follow me now followed them. Megan's trip did not happen. The hotels canceled. The money was frozen, and later returned to me, its rightful owner. She was furious for a long time. She posted vague, dramatic things online about toxic family and betrayal, never once understanding that every word she wrote about a villain was really a description of herself. She has not spoken to me since. Honestly, that has been one of the more peaceful gifts of this whole ordeal. My father was the only one who ever came close to an apology. Months later, he called me. He didn't say sorry, not exactly. Men of his generation rarely do. But he said, quietly, "I let your mother lead. I always let her lead. And I shouldn't have. Not this time. I watched them take that ring, and I said nothing. That's on me too. It wasn't enough. But it was something, and I told him so. Now, here is the part where I have to be honest with you, because I promised you the truth. And the truth is more complicated than a simple revenge story. I did not destroy my parents. I could have. I could have taken it further. I could have pressed charges. Selling stolen property under your own name leaves quite a paper trail. I could have taken back every dollar I had ever given them over 30 years, or as much of it as the law would allow. I could have left them with nothing, and honestly, a part of me wanted to. But I didn't. And I need to tell you why, because this is the heart of the whole thing. I didn't hold back because I forgave them. Let me be clear about that. Forgiveness has to be earned, and they never even tried to earn it. I don't hate them anymore. Hate is exhausting, and I was done being exhausted. But I don't trust them, and I never will again. I held back because of Sarah. Because I sat there one night, holding her ring, and I asked myself a question. I asked, who do you want to be when this is over? Sarah did not fall in love with a man who destroys people. She fell in love with a man who protects what matters. And she gave me that ring. She pressed it into my hand, and she called it proof that someone loved you completely. Not proof that you could win. Not proof that you could crush your enemies. Proof that you were worth loving. And I realized that if I let my parents turn me into someone bitter, someone consumed, someone who spent the rest of his life feeding a fire of revenge, then they would have taken something even bigger than the ring. They would have taken me, the me that Sarah loved, and I was not going to let them have that too. So I took back what was mine. I told the truth. I closed the door, firmly, permanently, with locks they could never pick again, and then I walked away. Not into revenge. Into freedom. I kept the ring, of course. It sits in a proper safe now, one my parents don't have a key to and never will. Sometimes I take it out and hold it, and I talk to Sarah, and I tell her, you were right, it always comes home. But something else happened too, that I didn't expect. For the first time in 30 years, I had space. Space that used to be filled with other people's emergencies. Space that used to be filled with guilt and duty, and the constant grinding effort of being the foundation for people who never once thanked the ground they stood on. That space filled up with life. I reconnected with friends I'd let drift away because I was always too busy rescuing my family. I started a small foundation, nothing huge, just something quiet, in Sarah's name, helping people who are grieving. Because I know now, better than most, how the grieving become targets, how the broken get robbed, and I wanted to stand between someone else and that particular cruelty. I slept in our bed again. It took a year, but I did it. And slowly, the loud silence of grief became something softer. Not gone, it never really goes, but softer, livable, warm around the edges, like her ring in the light. That is what happened after I froze the one account they forgot. I didn't just freeze a bank account. I froze the whole machine. I froze 30 years of being used. I froze the lie they'd told about me. And in the stillness that followed, for the first time in my entire life, I finally got to hear my own voice. And it was Sarah's voice too, all along, saying the things she'd been trying to tell me for years. You're allowed to say no. What betrayal teaches, if you survive it. So, let me leave you with what all of this taught me. Because if you've stayed with me this whole way, then this story is yours now too, and I want you to take the real lesson from it, not just the drama, but the truth underneath. The first thing I learned is this. The people who take you for granted are counting on you never counting the cost. My family got away with 30 years of using me because I never once added it all up. I never let myself see the full picture, because the full picture was too painful. It was easier to keep paying, keep fixing, keep forgiving, than to face the fact that the people who were supposed to love me most saw me as a resource. If any of this feels familiar to you, if there's someone in your life who only calls when they need something, who takes your kindness as weakness, who mistakes your patience for permission, I want you to do the thing I was too scared to do for far too long. Add it up. Look at the whole picture. You cannot fix what you refuse to see. The second thing I learned is this: being kind is not the same as being a doormat, and it took me half my life to know the difference. I used to think that saying no to my family made me a bad person. I thought love meant endless sacrifice, no matter how one-sided. But that's not love. That's just fear wearing love's clothes. Real love, the kind Sarah gave me, does not require you to disappear. It does not ask you to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You are allowed to have limits. You are allowed to protect what's precious to you. You are allowed to say no more. And the people who truly love you will still be there after you do. The ones who leave when you set a boundary, they were never there for you. They were only there for what you gave them. The third thing, and this is the most important one, revenge and justice are not the same thing. I could have burned my family to the ground, and I want you to understand, I would have been within my rights. But I chose something different. I chose to take back what was mine, to speak the truth out loud, and then to walk away, not because they deserved mercy, but because I deserved peace. The best revenge is not destroying the people who hurt you. The best revenge is refusing to let them turn you into someone as small and cruel as they are. The best revenge is building a life so full, so calm, so genuinely good, that their absence feels like relief instead of loss. And the last thing, the thing I hold on to the most, some things always come home. Sarah told me that ring always found its way back, no matter who took it, and she was right. But I think she was talking about more than a ring. I think she was telling me that the things that are truly yours, your dignity, your peace, your sense of who you are, those things can be stolen for a while. They can be buried under 30 years of guilt and grief and other people's expectations. But they are not gone. They are waiting. And one day, if you're brave enough to reach for them, they find their way home. My parents thought they took the last piece of my wife. Instead, they gave me back the first piece of myself. They forgot about one account. But the truth is, the account they should have been worried about was never the one at the bank. It was the account of everything they'd done, every taking, every lie, every laugh at my expense. And in the end, that account came due. It always does. If this story moved you, if any part of it felt a little too familiar, then take the one thing from it that matters most. You are not the foundation of someone else's comfort. You are a whole person, worthy of love that gives, instead of only taking. Protect what's precious. Speak the truth, and never ever let someone convince you that your kindness is a debt you owe them forever. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Take care of yourself. And remember, some things always come home.